What are the implications of the latest outbreak of hostilities for Russia's diplomacy in the Israel-Palestine conflict? By distancing itself from its previous aspiration to act as a mediator, Moscow has sought to gain leverage with Israel through its political support to Palestinian groups. To become a key actor in the conflict would bolster Russia's position in the region, substantiating Moscow's claims to being a great power with global reach. While it is unlikely that Hamas will defeat Israel's armed forces, the surprise, scale, and impact of the attack will have far-reaching consequences. Russia's ties with both Israel and Palestine are complex and long-standing. When the State of Israel was created in the 1940s, it found opportunistic, but still substantive, support among Eastern Bloc countries, including weapon deliveries from Czechoslovakia. However, by the late 1960s, the Soviet Union had shifted decidedly toward Israel's opponents, providing support to Egypt in the run-up to the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this foreign policy approach of balancing both sides has been limited by the international sanctions imposed on Russia. Faced with global isolation, Russian foreign policy has relied on countries sharing Moscow's anti-Western outlook. Yet Israel still regards the US as its essential security provider, a relationship that increasingly contradicts its relatively positive relations with Moscow. Hamas' surprise attack on Israel has already led to states declaring their positions in the new round of fighting and pledging their support to one side or another. Most countries condemned the assault, while some remained neutral and only a handful publicly supported the group. Unfortunately for Israel, no Middle Eastern state has condemned the war so far, as most support Hamas. The United Nations Security Council held a closed-door meeting with Israel's ambassador to the UN before the gathering called on the international community to condemn the attack. Russia reportedly opposed the condemnation of the Hamas offensive, meaning no joint statement was issued. However, Russia did not express support for Hamas and called for a ceasefire and de-escalation. Moscow and Beijing both diverged from the West by adopting this middle-of-the-road approach, eliciting disappointment from Israeli officials. The frustration has not yet been expressed toward Moscow, however, at least not overtly. On October 8, Alexander Ben-Zvi, Israel's ambassador to Russia, said that there might be Russian citizens among the victims of Saturday's attack by Hamas, but did not explicitly mention Moscow's position about the latest outbreak of hostilities. Meanwhile, Palestine's ambassador to Moscow, who does not represent Hamas, praised Russia's position as constructive. All the while, Russia has been making diplomatic overtures with the Arab world. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov released a joint call to stop the escalations with the Foreign Minister of Egypt, another key player in the conflict. On Monday, Lavrov spoke with the General Secretary of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul-Gheit, in Moscow. After their meeting, the pair vowed to work together to stop the bloodshed, with Lavrov reiterating the need for the UN to make a decision about the independence of Palestine. These moves might become important to position Russia in future intra-Arab dialogue, as the Palestinian Authority, another entity separate from Hamas, called for an emergency meeting of the Arab League this week to discuss the fighting. Lavrov's meeting with Abul-Gheit reveals much about Russia's plan to stand with the Arab League and its own position on the conflict. To make an already complex situation even more complicated, Ukraine, another country at war, is pursuing its own goals in the region. Since 2022, Ukraine, hoping to rally as much global support as possible, but also interested in counteracting Iran, an ally of Russia, has been stepping up its diplomatic efforts in the Middle East despite Russia's influence. Shortly after Saturday's attack by Hamas, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to express his solidarity. As of Monday, it was not clear if Russian President Vladimir Putin intended to make a similar call with the Israeli leader. Israel's internal political crisis over judicial reform and change of government also altered Israel's foreign policy toward Russia's war on Ukraine. Yair Lapid's brief tenure as prime minister saw the country pledge military assistance to Ukraine. However, Netanyahu's return to the premiership changed the country's foreign policy course, shifting back to a middle road on the Ukraine war. Last month, he not only met Zelensky in person, but his government signed an agreement to develop films with Russian artists, prompting accusations of enabling Russian propaganda from Kyiv. Despite Russia's calls to resume dialogue between Hamas and Israel, Moscow has signaled its convergence with the Arab League and not with Israel. There has been little effort to appear even-handed by making parallel overtures to Israel. The path forward for Russian diplomacy in the Israel-Palestine conflict will be shaped by how the ongoing fighting evolves, how Israel perceives Moscow's ongoing diplomatic maneuvering, and whether the reported capture of Russian citizens by Hamas is confirmed. Kyiv's outreach might work in chipping away at Russia's influence too. Is Russia behind Hamas' attack on Israel? A stunningly successful surprise attack launched by Hamas from the Gaza Strip into southern Israel at the weekend has opened a dark new chapter in the years-long war between the Islamist militant group and its Israeli enemies. Hamas justified Operation Al-Aqsa Flood as a response to Israel's recent police actions in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem and to violence by Israeli settlers illegally occupying parts of the Palestinian West Bank. The operation is believed to have killed at least 700 Israelis, wounded more than 2,100, and resulted in dozens of captives being taken back into the Gaza Strip. Israel's response is underway, with airstrikes in Gaza killing at least 413 people, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Israelis are now considering how the country was caught so catastrophically off guard as speculation mounts of foreign backing for the raid. Hamas has long been funded, armed, and trained by Iran as one of the Islamist militant organizations, alongside Islamic Jihad also in Gaza, Lebanese Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and a litany of Shia paramilitary formations in Iraq, leveraged by Tehran in its strategic confrontation with Israel and its Western backers. There has also been speculation on social media of Russian involvement in the Hamas operation, though there is no evidence indicating Moscow's alleged role. The Institute for the Study of War has suggested that Russia might benefit from the shift in international attention away from its atrocities in Ukraine and towards the deteriorating situation in Israel and the Palestinian territories. Israel is expected to launch a fresh and bloody ground assault into Gaza in the coming days, while tensions remain high in the occupied West Bank and along the border with Lebanon, where Hezbollah enjoys de facto control. Hamas' gift to Vladimir Putin. Russia is relishing and partly fueling chaos in a series of global flashpoints that divert the West's energies from Ukraine. Such a catastrophic security shock in the Middle East was probably a welcome surprise for a Russian president whose strategic priority is to divert Western support and attention away from Ukraine. A massive conflagration in Israel risks doing exactly that. The big question is how much credit to give the Kremlin for the perfect storm of mounting crises in Israel, Kosovo, the Caucasus, and Africa that are rearing up on America and Europe. For many, it's tempting to see Putin as a mastermind or puppet master, stirring up more conflicts than the West can cope with. In truth, Putin didn't ignite all these crises, but he's now happy to slosh fuel on the fire and play them to his advantage. He's relishing the chaos. The Kremlin's crowing propagandists are already spreading a narrative that a Middle East war is a win for Russia and the money for Ukraine will dry up. This was probably the best birthday gift for Putin. The attack against Israel will divide attention given the natural U.S. focus on Israel. In Washington, it's a foregone conclusion the Hamas attacks on Israel will reduce the U.S. focus on Ukraine, absorbed as it has been on the consequences of last week's ouster of Speaker Kevin McCarthy by a group of Republican hardliners, part of the same group of conservatives that has been looking to cut aid to Ukraine. The race to succeed McCarthy is unfolding now, making it more difficult for the Biden administration to gain congressional approval for any additional aid they want to give Israel. Let's start with the Hamas attacks. Russia has long courted the Islamist militants, and Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and other officials have made recent trips to Moscow. After Saturday's assaults, the Russians were quick to dust off old plans to pull Israel's borders back to where they were in 1967. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the creation of a Palestinian state was being thwarted by the destructive policy of the U.S., and you could almost hear the purr of satisfaction when a gloating former President Dmitry Medvedev dismissed the Hamas attacks as an expected development and turned his ire against the West.